This is a podcast about all things holistic health and self-discovery with me, Ask Elizabeth, counsellor, health advocate and fundraiser. Join me as we get to know these guests and learn about how they implement health, well-being and self-care practices into their lives. Welcome to Unearthing Wellbeing with Ask Elizabeth, where our greatest wealth is health. Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 30 of Unearthing Wellbeing. On the podcast this week, I had Marieke Rodenstein, who is a holistic dietitian, nutritionist, and functional medicine practitioner with over 15 years of experience in her field. We discussed the importance of our gut health and how getting to the root of the problem rather than a band-aid effect is pivotal in reaching optimal health. Take a listen for yourself. Here's Marieke. Hi Marieke, welcome to Unearthing Wellbeing, where your greatest wealth is health. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks Elizabeth. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you, and thank you so much for saying yes.
No problem. Looking forward to it.
Amazing. So for those who don't know who you are, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
So I'm Marieke Rodenstein. I am a holistic dietitian and also functional medicine practitioner. So I've been practicing for over 15 years. I actually studied in the Netherlands, where I'm originally from, although I did grow up in Australia. So I did my Bachelor of Science in Nutrition and Dietetics in the Netherlands, and I've worked as a dietitian both in the Netherlands and also in India. So my husband and I lived in India for a year and a half back in 2006 in Hyderabad. So I worked as a volunteer dietitian at a really big hospital there and also in the community. So that was a really wonderful experience. And then I convinced my husband, who's also Dutch, to move to Australia back in 2008. So we started in Sydney and I had my own private practice there. And we've been in Melbourne since 2012. So I'm up in Sassafras in the Dandenong Ranges and I have my private practice here. But I do see clients all over Australia and internationally as well. So as well as being a dietitian, I'm also a functional medicine practitioner. So I finished my functional medicine training through the Kresser Institute in the US back in early 2020. 2019. And I'm also a GAPS practitioner and mind practitioner. And I live here in Melbourne with my husband. I've got two boys, an 11-year-old and a 5-year-old. And love doing what I do. It's a real passion of mine and it has been for a very long time. I actually started on this path because of my own health issues. So as a teenager, I was an elite level distance runner and triathlete. And I dutifully followed, very high carb, low fat diets. I didn't even eat avocado and olive at the time because I thought there was too much fat in it. Oh, wow. And I did pretty well for a while. But over time, the overtraining and particularly the under eating and undernourishing my body, I started to run into a lot of issues, which started with stress fractures in my femur, the thickest bone in my body, because I had really poor bone density. I, of course, lost my periods because of very low body fat. I started to experience a lot of digestive issues, particularly chronic constipation. And I also ended up getting anorexia and bulimia and chronic fatigue syndrome. So, I should have been in the peak of my life in my teens. But my health really took a big dive. And I went from, training for numerous hours every day to really struggling to get out of bed and not just having physical health issues, but mental as well. I really struggled with depression and anxiety for many years. So I went down the conventional route for a long time and tried, antidepressants and going on the pill to get my period back and a dietitian approved eating plan, which at the time was still high carb, still low fat. This was in the 90s. And really my health just deteriorated even more. So that's when I just decided to take my health into my own hands, and I just started researching. And I was introduced to the work of Dr. Weston A. Price, who's very much, a big advocate of traditional diets. And I just started to apply a lot of those principles of traditional diets to my own diet, which was a big step, because I went from, not even eating an olive to then, embracing butter again and having some coconut oil and having the skin on my chicken. But by doing so, I did improve not only physically, but mentally as well. So then I was just really passionate to get into the field. And so I decided to study nutrition and dietetics, which was challenging because I had already formed my views and philosophy about nutrition, which was in many respects opposite to what the conventional, industry-driven food pyramid is all about. So it was quite challenging doing that degree. I had many interesting debates with my lecturers, but it was a really, a really great path to go down. And since then, I've just, done a lot more in the sort of alternative, I guess, more holistic space, like, the functional medicine training. So, yeah.
Wow, it sounds like you've been on a hell of a roller coaster, but it's really exciting, like going backwards and like then obviously reflecting on how you got to where you are now.
Yes,
but
yeah.
It sounds like you're in a much better space and you're healthy and happy, which is incredible to hear.
Yeah. So, it didn't happen overnight. And that's what I always tell my clients. You can't go from being, having years of your health deteriorating to suddenly, snapping out of it. It takes time and it takes dedication and determination. And, there are ups and downs, but the reward is that, you get to a place where you've peeled away all those layers of the onion. And it's sometimes very frustrating because you'll peel away a layer of an onion and you think, oh, my health has improved. And then another layer reveals itself. And so you've got to peel that away and then another layer. But eventually you get to the core. This is what I always tell my clients. Eventually you get to the core and you experience more vibrant health, not only physically, but mentally, because they are so much interconnected and you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, of course. And that's what I started this, I guess, whole thing introducing to others, how it's all about holistic health. You need everything to be aligned to have a sense of equilibrium.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you have spoken a lot in past about your gut. So in terms of how that influences one's health, can you go into detail about that?
Yeah, so the gut is the area that I'm most passionate about. I'm really passionate about gut health, partly also because of my own experience. When I had bulimia, I chronically abused laxatives. So I was popping, a huge amount of laxatives every day, and of course ended up with quite significant gut issues. It did quite a lot of damage to my gut. And so that was an area that I really had to focus on a lot for myself. And it's an area that, the more I delved into, the more I just became fascinated by it. So it is my area of speciality, and it is an area that has such a profound effect on our overall health, both mental and physical. So I always liken the gut to like the roots of a tree. If you look at a tree, the health of every branch, every twig, every leaf is dependent on the health of that root system. And it's very much like that in our body. The health of every organ system in our body is dependent on the health of the gut, which is like that root system. So there's a very strong connection between the gut and the skin. We call it the gut-skin axis. The gut and the brain, we call it the gut-brain axis. The gut and the lungs, the gut and the immune system. In fact, 70 to 80% of the immune system is located in the gut. There's a very strong connection between the gut and the adrenal hormone axis. So the gut really has such a huge influence on all of those organ systems. So when it comes to working on any aspect of your health, whether it's physical or mental, I always think that starting with gut health is a good place to start. And, it was Hippocrates that said 2,500 years ago that all disease begins in the gut. And now finally we're actually starting to understand and acknowledge that 2,500 years later. So, yeah.
That's incredible. And like I love the analogies that you're making with regards to like the trees, and how if you look into the root of the issues, you can actually find the source of the problem, which
Yeah.
can actually help you skip a few steps in terms of like resolutions as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's always really important to get to the root cause. I always give the analogy, if you were to come home and walk into the kitchen and you saw that the sink was blocked and the tap was on and there's just water gushing everywhere, there's just water all over the floor, what is the first thing that you do? Do you turn off the tap, which is the source of the problem, or do you get a mop and start mopping? Obviously, in that respect, the answer is really obvious. You would turn off the tap, because once you turn off the tap, you kind of fix the problem. But, in our modern day with our health, we're often grabbing the mop and we start mopping, and in the instance of this scenario in your house, if you start mopping, you'll be mopping and mopping for hours and hours and days and weeks, and eventually your floors will rot and your house will collapse. And that's what often happens with our health. We constantly mopping, we're putting a Band-Aid on a symptom rather than looking at the root cause. And, there are Band-Aids, there are medications that do effectively treat symptoms. So if you've got a headache, there's Panadol. If you're depressed, there's antidepressants. If you're constipated, there's laxatives. If you have candida, there's Canesten. If you're not sleeping well, there's sleeping pills. And they do a pretty good job of addressing those symptoms, but they don't actually address the root cause of why you're getting those symptoms in the first place. So, you become more dependent on them. And over time, those relatively small or minor symptoms can become much more significant issues, like chronic disease, and 1 in 4 Australians have a chronic disease, which is quite significant. So the gut is always a really good place to start, because it does have such a profound influence on so many different areas of your health.
Yeah, that's so interesting. If we address the issue of the gut, we can definitely get to the bottom of a lot of the issues that arise in modern day society.
Yeah, that's right. So if you look at, that tree scenario, as I mentioned, there's a very strong connection between the gut and the skin, for example. So eczema, acne, psoriasis, rosacea, all of those issues have a direct relationship with the gut. So if you work on the gut, you can actually help to minimize those symptoms. And there's a strong relationship between, as I mentioned, the gut and the brain. So difficulty concentrating, foggy thinking, depression, anxiety, ADD, ADHD, autism, schizophrenia, bipolar, eating disorders, all of those issues have a relationship with the health of your gut. So again, if you work on your gut, you can help to address those symptoms. And there's a very strong connection between the gut and the immune system, as I said. So frequent colds, flus, ear infections, chest infections, and autoimmune conditions. And autoimmune conditions are the fastest growing health issue in the 20 to 50-year-old age bracket. And actually in the US now, there are 1 in 6 people that are diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, and we're not far behind in Australia. And again, that has a direct relationship with the health of your gut. So there's all these kind of modern day diseases that do actually relate to the gut. And of course, just by fixing the gut, you won't be able to fix all of those conditions, but it's a really great place to start, and an important place to look at and address when it comes to treating the whole body and improving those health conditions.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So for you, like working in this industry, and this is what you're passionate about, what are your what do you notice most in terms of the issues that come out of seeing clients, and the warning signs that we should personally be keeping an eye on for like unhealthy guts?
Yeah. So interestingly, over the past 18 months, since COVID, one of the most common symptoms that I'm seeing is reflux. And it's very interesting because reflux is more often a condition of not having enough stomach acid rather than having too much stomach acid. And one of the key things that inhibits stomach acid production is stress. And of course, we've been collectively experiencing so much stress around the world, and it has a really significant impact on digestion and particularly stomach acid production. So I've seen a lot of people with digestive issues like reflux, bloating, nutritional deficiencies as well, because if you don't produce enough stomach acid, it becomes much harder for you to disassociate key nutrients like iron and B12, which I'm seeing a lot of deficiencies of, from the food you're eating, so they can be absorbed in the small intestine. So it's interesting that over these past sort of 18 months, I've really noticed a greater increase in digestive symptoms, hormonal symptoms as well, because hormones are obviously very strongly associated with stress. So I've been seeing a lot more hormonal issues in women as well. And that also partly relates to the gut, of course. But yeah, definitely gut issues are a key one that I primarily see. And warning signs can be gut related. So you can experience, as I mentioned, reflux, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, cramping. But also, if you have underlying gut issues, some people don't actually present with the typical gut issues, but they might experience, for example, eczema or rosacea, or they might have joint pain or stiffness, or they might be experiencing difficulty sleeping or difficulty losing weight or anxiety or depression. So, a lot of people think, well, I'm passing a good bowel motion every day, I don't get bloated, I must have really good gut health. But you can still have suboptimal gut health and not necessarily experience gut-related symptoms, but you might get those symptoms that present elsewhere. So there can be a lot of different sort of warning signs. And unfortunately, there are a lot of things that affect our gut health, stress being a huge one, but antibiotics, of course. Antibiotics are probably the most significant and life-saving discovery in modern medicine, but they do have a serious downside in that they don't discriminate between good or bad bacteria. They just wipe out everything. And it can actually take an adult with a healthy balance of bacteria up to 6 to 12 months to restore their balance after just one course of antibiotics. So that can really disrupt the microbiome. A poor diet, which of course, again, during COVID, many people have been eating a lot more processed food, which is of course very understandable, because it's many of us have found ourselves being at home and, developing a much closer relationship with our fridge and pantry than we ordinarily would. And so, poorer diet, more preservatives, more sugar, that can affect the gut. Herbicides and pesticides have a huge influence on the gut microbiome. Alcohol, of course, alcohol consumption has been shown to increase as well. So there's been many things during the past, 18 months with COVID that have actually made it more difficult for many people to really stay on top of optimal gut health, and therefore they're showing all these different symptoms.
So interesting. And like going back to the reflux that you were referring to before, I'm actually reflecting on my own experience, and I've been pretty good in terms of my health. I actually have improved it over the last 18 months. So I did the opposite to
That's
most
great.
people.
Yes.
Yeah. But for some reason, maybe about 3 months ago, I was experiencing a lot of reflux, and I was wondering what was the issue. So I started eliminating chili from my diet, because I thought it was that, and then other stuff. And then I went on the cleanse, and I didn't even realize, but the reflux stopped.
Right.
So it's just interesting how reflux can be associated to stress.
Yes, yeah, because the optimal pH in your stomach is between about 1.5 and 2.5. So it's really, really acidic there. But when you don't produce enough stomach acid, as I mentioned, stress is a key factor in that. When you eat food, if the stomach isn't acidic enough, you don't break down that food as effectively and efficiently as you otherwise would. So the food sits in your stomach longer than it otherwise would, and that food can start to ferment. And that fermentation actually creates gases, and those gases increase the intra-abdominal pressure in your stomach. And that pressure is what can force that small amount of stomach acid that you do have through that lower esophageal sphincter into the esophagus, and that's what causes reflux. And often we think, oh, there's all this, stomach acid in the esophagus, there must be an overflow in the stomach, but it's actually a functional issue of not producing enough. Therefore, that inhibits digestion and creates this fermentation and intra-abdominal pressure. So unfortunately, the common way of treating it is with like a proton pump inhibitor, but that actually worsens the situation because that suppresses stomach acid even further. So you're digesting even more ineffectively and inefficiently, and therefore also not absorbing the nutrients from your food as effectively. And it becomes a vicious cycle because you require zinc and magnesium and B12 for stomach acid production. But if you're not absorbing those nutrients, you don't have those building blocks. So a lot of people end up in that very vicious cycle of dependence on these pharmaceutical medications, which sometimes can be helpful temporarily to ease symptoms, but you really, again, need to look at the root cause and really work on those foundations of optimal gut health, which is promoting optimal stomach acid and also bile flow, which helps to emulsify and digest your fats, which are really key for overall health, particularly brain health, hormone health, sex hormone production, stress hormone production. So those really foundational factors of gut health, many people sort of launch straight into the complex stuff, but it's sitting down and eating mindfully, chewing your food thoroughly. Those kind of things, are really simple, but so important. And we often kind of bypass them in our journey to look, at the more deeper, complex aspects of our gut health, which are important. But if you don't get those foundations right, you're not going to get the same benefits. So,
So interesting. And yeah, what I'm hearing a lot is that, well, from you anyway, that we shouldn't be relying too heavily on medication to solve the issues. We need to strip off the onion layers, like you were saying before, and actually go back to basics. It's really
absolutely. Yeah, just really, go back to basics and look at root cause factors, and that's really key. And obviously, sometimes pharmaceuticals can be incredibly helpful, and we're very fortunate that we have access to pharmaceuticals, but you can't just rely on pharmaceuticals as a means of treating whatever condition you have. You really need to look at what is causing this issue and how can I go about actually addressing that with diet, supplementation, lifestyle factors. So just relying on taking a medication and think, oh, well, now my problem's solved, you won't get the level of health that you want, and you won't get the level of healing that you want by doing so.
Absolutely. And what would be your key suggestions to improving our gut health?
Yeah, so I always, when I talk about improving your gut health, I always liken it to, improving your garden. I always liken it to gut gardening, basically. So if you want to, create a beautiful garden, you've got to get rid of the weeds and you've got to plant new seeds, and then you have to water and fertilize those seeds. And put very simply, that's also what you can do in the gut. So it's about getting rid of those weeds, so getting rid of those opportunistic or pathogenic bacteria in your gut, seeding the gut with more beneficial bacteria and really feeding those beneficial bacteria. So there are sort of two closely related variables that determine our gut health. The first is the bacteria, gut flora, or gut microbiota, and the second is the gut barrier. And that's the whole lining of your digestive tract from the mouth all the way through to the anus. So when it comes to improving the balance of bacteria, that's where that, the weed seed feed principle, put very simply, obviously it's a little bit more complicated than that, but that can be applied. So, the one thing that most opportunistic or pathogenic bacteria like Streptococcus or yeast like Candida, what they thrive on is sugar and carbohydrate. So if you're having a high sugar or high carbohydrate diet, you're basically providing an all-you-can-eat buffet for those opportunistic bacteria to thrive. So it's really about that. Weeding is about just cutting out those refined, processed carbohydrates and sugars. So you're basically cutting off the food supply of these opportunistic species, and then seeding the gut a lot of us think about probiotics, but I really am a big advocate of using fermented foods and wild, foods that are grown in vegetable garden or bought from farmers markets, pardon me, where they still have all of those beautiful microbes surrounding the food. So if you, for example, have a vine of cherry tomatoes, each cherry tomato growing on that vine, assuming you haven't sprayed it, has its own little microbiome, all these amazing organisms on the outside. So if you just eat that cherry tomato, that's actually nature's probiotics, because the cherry tomato is coated in these wonderful bacteria. And then, of course, fermented foods are a wonderful source of live bacteria, lactobacillus species and bifidobacteria species. They're very high in enzymes that support digestion. So they're a wonderful way to get all of those probiotics. And you'll get so many more strains and varieties of probiotics having whole foods fresh from a vine, or, from, if you don't have a garden, going to farmers markets where they, that they don't spray and just they have healthy soils, enjoying that produce. That's such a wonderful way of getting these good microbes, and you'll get so many more bacteria than if you were just to take a probiotic supplement, because a supplement may have at most maybe 12 strains of bacteria, but that's nothing compared to a tablespoon of sauerkraut, or having some leafy greens from your garden, which have all of those beautiful microbes. So I think a lot of people prematurely think, well, if I just take this probiotic every day, I'm seeding my gut with all this good bacteria, but that's not the case. So sometimes probiotics can be very helpful, but I generally recommend relying on whole foods and fermented foods. And then, of course, you want to feed all of those good bacteria, and that's where prebiotics come in. So mostly vegetables. And, the unfortunate thing in Australia is that the recommended serve of vegetables for adults is 5 to 6 serves of vegetables per day. And only 6% of the population in Australia actually meet those 5 to 6 serves. So, we have a very long way to go here in Australia before all of us are eating a sufficient amount of food for all of these good bacteria, because they require food just like we do. So every time you have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, ideally you're having some kind of fuel source for those beneficial bacteria. So wonderful prebiotics are things like raw garlic and raw onion, asparagus, which is in season now, Brussels sprouts, which you can still get, they're still partially in season, all your leafy greens, broccoli, cauliflower, kiwi fruits, nuts and seeds, coconuts. So there's such a wide variety of prebiotics. Even cacao and dark chocolate is a prebiotic. And then you've also got, all your really vibrant polyphenolic foods, that all those vibrant colors. So the deep reds and the deep purples, like black olives and pomegranates and blackberries and blueberries and black rice. All those deep, dark pigmented foods are amazing prebiotics as well. So eat the rainbow is what I always suggest. Have as much variety as possible, but really try every meal to have some fuel for the good bacteria, some kind of plant-based food to feed those good bacteria. So that's kind of again, put very simply, a principle that you can help to restore that gut microbiome by weeding out those opportunistic species, by cutting down your sugar and carbohydrate, seeding the gut with more beneficial bacteria by having, food grown in healthy soil and fermented foods, and then feeding those good bacteria by really increasing your intake of, the whole plethora of wonderful plant-based foods that we have available to us.
That's incredible. And I always say, eat the rainbow. I've been really into meze platters / grazing
great
platters.
Yes.
And just like having a rainbow entices me to eat those raw vegetables as well.
Yeah. And you can make it fun. You can mash up some avocado and put some lemon or lime juice and a bit of smoked paprika or something to make like a homemade guacamole. It takes so little time. So if you're not so keen on just having raw veggie sticks, then dip it into that, or make a hummus, or even just having some olive oil with a little bit of balsamic vinegar or some salt, and dipping your veggie sticks into that is really simple. So you can jazz it up. It doesn't always have to be really boring, but it doesn't have to be complex either. I always do think it's best just to keep it simple. And I think a lot of people now feel, I guess, because of the popularity of all of the amazing cooking shows, your master chefs and things, people feel like putting just a plate of vegetables, steamed vegetables, and a piece of fish or meat on a plate is quite inferior, because we're so used to seeing all these beautifully curated meals and pretty pictures on Instagram of, the berry coulis just beautifully splashed on the plate. And I think that, whilst it's wonderful, I think it does make a lot of people feel like they're not doing enough by just plating up something that's really simple. But our bodies aren't designed to digest 20 different ingredients in one meal. Keeping it really simple is the best thing, and just making a beautiful sauce out of some herbs and olive oil, or a bit of yogurt and tahini and lemon, or you don't need to have all these really complex things. And that's, I think, really key, because a lot of people feel very overwhelmed and say they don't have time for cooking. But yes, if you've got a recipe that takes an hour to make and has 30 ingredients, not many people have time to do that. So
yeah, exactly.
Putting together a really quick and simple meal, I think, is always the best thing.
Absolutely. And I'm finding now that I'm in this type of field, a lot of people want convenience.
Yeah.
So yes. I guess my question following that is, if we've got like a protein, say a steak or a fish, what would be your suggestion in terms of how much or how many different types of vegetables should be like along with that?
Yeah, so I always think the more vegetables, the better. But if you can, at least have 3 or 4 different varieties. So if you're having a serve of sauerkraut or kimchi or something, you could already count that as one serve. And you're getting your probiotics and your enzymes that are going to help digest that meal. And then trying to have, at least 3 or more other types of vegetables. So I generally recommend mostly above ground vegetables. So, your leafy greens and broccoli, cauliflower, all those above ground vegetables, and then having maybe one serve of a below ground vegetable like a sweet potato or white potato, just so you've got some more starchy carbohydrate. And that's particularly important for the gut microbiome, that you're not too low carb too long, because that can definitely, starve off some of those good bacteria. And there's, conflicting opinions about long-term ketogenic diets, but I do think for achievability and sustainability and for optimum microbiome health, it is a good idea to keep in some of those starchy vegetables. And for growing children, that might be much more frequently than for an adult. And certainly if you're wanting to lose weight, then you can reduce them. But yeah, having a whole spectrum of different vegetables, I think, is always the best. Different colors, and again, above ground, below ground.
That's great. Thank you for answering that, because I think a lot of people listening will be questioning that. And like you said, it doesn't need to be all in the one meal either. You said 6 vegetables across the day. Yeah. So that's the recommendation. And yeah, as I said, only 6% of the population actually achieves that, but there is evidence to suggest that we really should be aiming towards 8 or 9 serves per day for really optimum gut health. But I think it's a good place to start, just to try and aim for those 5 serves. And it's when you actually think about it and you plan out your meals, it's actually not too difficult to do. So if you, instead of having some chips or crackers or something for a snack, having some vegetable sticks with like a hummus or something, and if you're having eggs for breakfast, quickly sauteing up some spinach or mushrooms, or actually just having a spoonful of sauerkraut or kimchi and maybe with some cucumber, that way you're getting some that doesn't cost a lot of extra time. And then for dinner, really upping it, and perhaps even for if you enjoy smoothies, you could add a little bit of beetroot or carrot or avocado or spinach into that smoothie. So that's another serve. So you can actually sneak vegetables in quite easily when you really kind of plan it. So it shouldn't be too challenging. Yeah, 100%. And like I've always said that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not the expert here, but when you can't reach that like certain amount of vegetables in a day, it's okay to have like the greens powder in like a smoothie if you're on the run and you don't have enough vegetables in the fridge or whatever.
Yeah, then that can definitely be a good kind of compensation. It would be ideal to have it on top of all those vegetables, but indeed, if there's a day where it's not possible, then it is a really good alternative. Yeah.
Great. And personally, what's your favorite meals to cook/eat?
So I am, and I have been this ever since I was a young child, a huge fan of liver. I love liver. When I was a young child, I would, my parents would mention that I'd always I'd lap up liver and liverwurst. It's very popular Dutch food, liverwurst. So I love liver, and a really quick and easy lunch, or even a last minute dinner that I do would be pate with lots of veggie sticks, and like a mezza plate, like you mentioned, like some olives and some nice cheese. And so that's a really quick and easy lunch or dinner option. Sometimes breakfast, sometimes I have it for breakfast. I am really about simple, quick and easy meals. So I really love doing lots of roast vegetables, so just heaps of different vegetables, capsicums and onion and carrot and beetroot, and just drizzling that with olive oil and putting lots of fresh herbs like rosemary and thyme and sage and just roasting them in the oven, and then just having a big mound of those roast vegetables with a nice piece of meat or fish. So yeah, really, really simple. I enjoy cooking, but I don't enjoy complex recipes. So I just like to keep it, keeping it really simple. Yeah.
Amazing. And then what do you do for your self-care?
So like many people, I'm sure many people in Melbourne can relate to this, and also in other parts of Australia, my self-care has gone out the window at times during the last period with COVID. Which has been very challenging. I'm juggling consulting with also homeschooling, and then keeping my 5-year-old who's not yet started, he's just turned 5, not yet started school. So it's been, like many people and many parents have experienced, quite a challenge juggling that. And so certainly for me, I've really had to prioritize having those moments where I do really take time out for myself. And I do think that self-care is all about just doing things that you love to do and that make you happy. And that can be different for everybody. I don't think there's like a one size fits all, and that, self-care, you have to do this, or, you have to do that. So something that I really enjoy doing is just getting out into nature, particularly on sunny days like today with my husband and kids, and we just go for a long bushwalk. That's something, just nature for me is the best medicine, physically, mentally, and particularly when it's sunny. I just love getting out into the sunshine, exposing some of my skin to the sun, just the feeling of the sun on your skin, particularly, after a long winter in Victoria. I'm sure everyone in Victoria can relate. Feeling the sun on your skin is just like this warm blanket. It's just beautiful. So whenever it's a sunny day, I get my boys like, strip off your t-shirt, we're going to go and sit out in the sun, and we play games. And that's what brings me joy, just, being really present with my kids and being outdoors and in the sunshine. But there's been many days where, I've been consulting and then homeschooling and then cooking and then cleaning, and then it sort of gets to 10 p.m. and I'm thinking, I haven't actually really done anything today that I really enjoy. So that's something that both my husband and I are really trying to prioritize more now. And I think, many people are in the same situation where the days kind of just roll into each other, and you really got to, purposefully and consciously make those times where you do really do something that you love. One thing that I have fairly consistently done, every week I always buy myself a bunch of flowers. They just make me happy. I love having a bright, beautiful bunch of flowers in my house, and I love supporting. We've got beautiful florist, being up in the Dandenong Ranges, there's a lot of flowers that grow up here, and a beautiful florist that I just love supporting, and really love buying that bunch. So that's something that I've consistently done, and every time I look at the flowers, it makes me smile. I really, really love that. So that's something else that I do. Normally I love going to farmers markets and chatting to farmers, and that's something that I love, but haven't been able to do that for quite a long time. So looking forward to being able to do that again, hopefully in the not too distant future. Yeah, fingers crossed. But yeah, definitely outdoors. Nature for me is really key, and that's why we also moved from inner city to up in the Dandenong Ranges, so we could be closer to nature, because it's something that really does fill my cup and make me happy. Yeah,
it's absolutely beautiful, and I 100% agree that we aren't perfect, and in terms of social media, whatever we see on there, it doesn't mean that we're fulfilling everything on our cups. We're not perfect, like I said, and we're just human. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And for the last question that I ask all my guests, for someone wanting to unearth their well-being, what are your 3 tips?
So number one, I would say start healthy swapping. Start looking at all of the things that you're currently doing, all of the foods that you're eating, or the personal care products that you're using, and swapping them out for healthier alternatives, because there are healthier alternatives for pretty much everything, I'm sure, that you're eating or applying to your skin. So, even if you just make one healthy swap a week, that's 52 swaps in a year, which can be a life change when it comes to someone's health. So I always recommend, starting slow, not trying to do everything and change everything all at once, because then it can become quite overwhelming, and if you don't do everything, then you feel like you've failed. Whereas if you just make selected healthy swaps, it could be one week you decide, okay, I'm going to ditch my Cadbury dairy milk chocolate and I'm going to opt for like a nice dark 85% cacao chocolate. And the following week it might be, okay, this week I'm going to start having a little spoonful of sauerkraut or kimchi with my dinner. And then the next week it could be, okay, this week I'm going to have vegetable sticks as a snack instead of my crisps or crackers or cookies. And then the next week might be, I'm going to increase the types of vegetables I have for dinner. And so if you kind of just go through that, and it can also be, as I said, personal care products, because another thing we need to look at is what we're putting on our body as well as in our body. So it could be that, from one week you're going to swap your, standard shower gel for just a natural Castile soap, or just a bar of coconut oil or olive oil based soap. And you might say, okay, this week I'm going to get rid of my standard laundry detergent and opt for an environmentally and low tox version. So if you just, make those changes, make a list, a month or 2 in advance of what you're going to do every week. And as I said, it could just be one thing, or you could do 2 or 3 things. And when you've achieved that, really tick that off and give yourself, a pat on the back, because that's a really great achievement. So healthy swapping is the number one. Number 2, really embracing the outdoors. And a lot of us have had so little outdoor time with the lockdowns, and especially now with spring, it's just so wonderful for the soul to be outdoors. So even if you don't have nature at your doorstep, just actually going for a walk around the block, just being outdoors, I think is a really, really important strategy to improve your health. And it's been scientifically shown that actually being out in nature and being outdoors is really wonderful to improve someone's health. And then number 3, I would say, don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. I certainly struggled with this a lot when I was younger. I wanted to do everything perfectly. And particularly when I also got into the field, I always felt like I had to be the best version of myself and be a good role model. And so do everything perfectly, because this is what I'm telling I'm recommending all these things to my clients. But by trying to strive for the perfection, you forget that, what you're actually doing is good enough. So really not letting the perfect get in the way of the good, and acknowledging all of your achievements and improvements is really, really important, and not keep thinking, oh, I need to do better, or I'm not there yet. Just every time you make a small, even subtle change, be proud of that change and acknowledge that, and, give yourself a good pat on the back and celebrate it.
I love those. Thank you so much. Those were brilliant. And I think we all need to apply that in our lives. And obviously, like you said, with self-care, for instance, it's going to be different for everyone. But if one person resonates with this, that's incredible.
Yeah. So I've really enjoyed being part of the podcast. Thank you for having me on, and I hope people got some little gold nuggets from it that they can apply to their own health and well-being and make some improvements.
Thank you so much for coming on. I think a lot of people will enjoy this and implement your suggestions. And for those who are interested in contacting you, where can they find you?
So I'm very much a very no frills dietitian. You won't find me on Facebook or Instagram or anything like that. Just not my thing. All respect to anyone who wants to do that, totally fine. But yeah, it's never been my thing. So I have a very basic, simple website, and that's about as much as I have.
Love it.
So they can find me at thenutritionpractice.com.au, and my contact details are there, and my email as well. So that's the best way for people to get in touch.
Beautiful. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast, and I hope you have an amazing day.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. I hope you enjoyed listening and felt compelled to become more proactive, to add more vegetables into your diet and eat all the colours of the rainbow. I know I did. To ensure Ask Elizabeth and Unearthing Wellbeing continues to grow, please subscribe and rate the podcast. Feel free to also share and tag us on your socials. I hope you have a lovely day. Be safe and be kind. Take care.